I once spent 3 hours in an airport in Dallas. My flight was delayed. My phone died. The charging stations were all taken by people who looked like they'd been there since the Bush administration. And I sat there, in that molded plastic chair with nothing. No book, no screen, no conversation. Just the sound of a CNN monitor I couldn't hear properly, and the occasional sniffle from a child 3 gates down. And I felt it. This specific, heavy, almost physical ache. Like my brain was a car engine running in neutral, revving louder and louder but going nowhere. I wanted to claw my own skin off. Not because anything was wrong, because nothing was. We have a word for that feeling. We call it boredom, and we treat it like weather, like gravity, like something that's always been there, waiting in the background of human existence. But here's the thing. It hasn't. Boredom is not gravity. Boredom is not weather. Boredom is an invention. And it might be the most successful invention of the last 200 years. Because once we invented it, we built an entire civilization to escape it. So stay with me. Because what I'm about to tell you will change how you understand every empty moment of your life. Imagine you're a farmer in the year 1200. You wake up before dawn because the animals don't care about your sleep schedule. You work the field until your back screams. You eat something heavy and dull. You repair a fence. You collapse when it's dark. You do this again tomorrow, and the day after. And every day until you die at 35 from a tooth infection. Where exactly does boredom fit into that day? It doesn't. Not because medieval peasants were having a blast. They weren't. They were exhausted, hungry, terrified of famine, of war, of the church, of everything. But they weren't bored. They didn't have time to be bored. The concept itself required a kind of luxury that simply didn't exist. You can't be bored when survival is a full-time job. Boredom requires empty space. And empty space was a privilege no one could afford. The ancient Greeks had a word, acedia, sometimes translated as boredom, but that's wrong. Acedia was a spiritual condition, a monk in the desert who couldn't pray, who stared at the sand and felt the world was meaningless. It was a sin, not a mood. The Romans had tedium, which is closer to weariness, to disgust with life. But neither of these is the thing you feel in a DMV line. Neither of these is the restless, itchy, screen-checking emptiness that defines modern boredom. Because modern boredom is something else entirely. And it needed something to exist that no ancient civilization had. It needed clocks. Before the 14th century, most humans didn't know what time it was. Not really. Monks had bells for prayers. Farmers had the sun. But the idea that time was a uniform, measurable, ticking resource, that you could waste an hour or kill 15 minutes, didn't exist. Time was just life happening. You planted when the ground thawed. You harvested when the grain was gold. You didn't clock in. Then mechanical clocks appeared in European town squares, and slowly, quietly, everything changed. Time became a grid, a thing you could see, measure, divide, and own. By the 18th century, factories were running on clock time. Workers punched in, workers punched out. And for the first time in human history, there was a clear, sharp line between work and not work. Think about that phrase. Before industrialization, there was no not work. There was just life, and it was all work. But once that line was drawn, something unprecedented appeared on the other side of it. Empty time. Structured, predictable, recurring empty time. Evenings, weekends, the Sabbath. And into that empty time, boredom rushed in, like water filling a hole. The word itself shows up in English in the mid-19th century. Charles Dickens used boredom in Bleak House in 1852. That's not an accident. That's the exact moment when industrial capitalism had created enough leisure, enough empty, measured, non-working time, that people needed a word for what it felt like. Before that, you didn't need the word. It would be like having a word for the feeling of having too many diamonds. It simply didn't apply to enough people often enough to matter. But once the word existed, the feeling became real. Because here's the cruel trick of human consciousness. We can't feel what we can't name. Or rather, we feel it, but we don't know what it is. We can't hold it. We can't fear it. And we certainly can't build a $4 trillion industry to destroy it. Because that's exactly what happened. The moment we named boredom, we declared war on it. And we have been losing that war ever since. Radio was invented to fill silence. Television was invented to fill evenings. The smartphone was invented to fill every single remaining gap in your consciousness. The average person checks their phone 96 times a day. That's once every 10 minutes. Not because there's something important there, but because the alternative, 10 minutes of unstructured, unmediated, unnamed mental space, has become physically unbearable. I want you to sit with that for a second. The feeling you had as a kid on a long car ride, staring out the window, nothing to do, nowhere to go. That feeling was not a malfunction. It was not a problem to be solved. It was the natural state of a brain that had evolved for 2 million years without constant stimulation. and now we treat it like a disease. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. Boredom might be the most important feeling you have, and we are eradicating it. Neuroscientists have studied what happens in your brain when you're bored, and it's not nothing. It's the opposite of nothing. When you're bored, your brain isn't shutting down. It's switching modes. It's entering what's called the default mode network, a set of brain regions that light up when you're not focused on the outside world. Daydreaming, mind wandering, making connections between distant ideas, remembering who you are. This is not poetic. This is mechanical. Your brain needs boredom the way your lungs need air. Not constantly, but regularly. Studies show that people who are bored before a creative task perform better than people who are entertained. Boredom is the soil where creativity grows. It's the empty field where your brain plants ideas it didn't know it had, but we don't let it. We have become so terrified of that empty field that we pave it over the second it appears. Notification, scroll, video, podcast, anything to avoid the sensation of mental neutrality. And in doing so, we are starving the exact neural process that makes us creative, self-aware, and human. Think about your best ideas. The ones that came to you in the shower, on a walk, while staring at a ceiling. None of those moments involved a screen. All of them involved boredom. The shower is the last place we allow ourselves to be unstimulated, and it's the only place most of us still have ideas. There's a study I keep coming back to. In 2014, researchers at the University of Virginia gave participants a choice: sit alone in a room for 15 minutes with nothing but their thoughts, or give themselves an electric shock. Just a mild one, but still. Pain. And a shocking number of people, men especially, chose the shock. They would rather feel physical pain than feel nothing. They would rather hurt than be bored. That should terrify us, because it means we have trained ourselves to fear our own minds. We have built a world so saturated with stimulation that the absence of it feels like dying, and maybe in a way it is. The self you are when you're alone, unstimulated, unobserved, that self needs silence to exist. Without it, you become a reflection of your feeds, a composite of what you consume, not a person, a playlist. I don't say this from some mountain of enlightenment. I say this as someone who checks his phone while brushing his teeth, as someone who has opened Instagram, closed it, and opened it again in the same breath, as if something magical had happened in the 3 seconds between. I am not better at this than you. I am probably worse. But I am starting to understand what we gave up, and it wasn't small. Boredom was invented in the 19th century, but it was invented by accident. Industrialization didn't set out to create a new form of human suffering. It just created empty time, and empty time created a feeling, and that feeling needed a name. But once it had a nanotize it, we could sell the cure, and the cure, endless, frictionless, algorithmic entertainment, turned out to be worse than the disease. Because the cure doesn't just kill boredom, it kills the default mode network. It kills daydreaming. It kills the long, slow, unproductive wandering that every philosopher, every artist, every scientist who ever had a breakthrough needed. Einstein worked at a patent office and stared out a window. Newton sat in a garden. Darwin took 4-hour walks. They were all, by modern standards, extremely bored, and we are, by any historical standard, extremely not. So what do we do with this? I'm not going to tell you to delete your apps. You won't. I won't. That's not the point. The point is to understand that the itch you feel when nothing is happening is not a signal that something is wrong. It's a signal that something is right, that your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, that the empty space is not a void to be filled. It's a field to be tended. The next time you're in a line, the next time your flight is delayed, the next time your phone dies in an airport in Dallas, don't reach for the charger immediately. Sit there. Let the engine rev in neutral. Let your mind do what it was built to do before we invented clocks, before we invented weekends, before we invented the word that made the feeling real. You might be surprised by what grows in the empty space. I want to hear about your emptiest moment. Not your most exciting, not your most productive, the most boring, the longest car ride, the worst wait, the time you had nothing and nowhere to be. What happened in your head? Did you panic? Did you daydream? Did you come up with something you still remember? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading every single one, because I think we're all trying to remember how to be alone with our own minds. And maybe the first step is admitting that we forgot. Thank you for being with us in your boredom time. Subscribe for more, and see you in the next one.